Okay, welcome back to the Total Crime Substack video content. We the last time I did one of these was on New Year's Day or Eve, I think, when I did one. But today I have a special guest, my brother, my elder brother Nigel, who's joining us from Brighton.
Good evening. Good to see
Good
you.
evening. And well, tell me first, what interest have you got in true crime, or apart from
Well,
stories I might have told you?
yeah. Well, I mean, the stories I hear from you are interesting, but I'm a big listener of true crime podcasts,
Hmm.
and I'm interested in true crime. I read a lot of fictional crime as well. But in sort of doing some prep for what we're going to talk about tonight, it reminded me that in 1976, when I was just 15, or giving me age away there.
No, that's a useful bit of contextualizing in place. People are trying to guess what age you are.
Yeah, I've given it away at the outset. But so, age 15, I bought a book about Donald Nielsen and that whole case because it was it was gripped the TV. You know, that story was all over the TV for a
Hmm.
period of months as they tracked him down, and and I read a book about true crime, a true crime case at the age of 15, and so that I've kind of go back to that's where it must have first interested me.
That's
Um,
weird because I vaguely remember I thought I gave our Uncle Bernard a book about the Black Panther around about the 70s. So I don't know, it was a different book, but he obviously was a huge story at the time. Anyway, we'll get
yeah,
onto him in a minute, but
yeah.
we're going to do it sort of little bit chronologically. So the era we're talking about is it's kind of radio sort of moving into TV, but sort of very much black and white pictures.
Yep.
It's basically the 1940s. So
We'll paint a
um,
picture for you in black and white.
yes, yeah, get switch your TVs over to black and white. Where obviously in those days you used to watch Match of the Day and they would tell you which colour were Manchester United are in the dark shirts today.
Mhm.
So yes, starting with not a million miles from you're down in Sussex, and this case was very much in Crawley, wasn't it? So John Haig, who apparently grew up in he was born in Lincolnshire and grew up in Yorkshire. I was listening to a very good podcast a YouTube called Well I Never, like a sort of
Yeah,
17-minute reminder of it. And
yeah.
yeah, so he grew up. He was a strange child. He was an only child. Had a very sort of religious Protestant sort of parents, and his dad was a colliery manager. So
Mm.
he used to, and apparently little John would sort of bully kids at school, and they wouldn't. They the miners in this village wouldn't want to complain because the dad was a sort of colliery manager or something, and so he got away with not murder, but he got away with a lot of bullying and nastiness apparently.
Mm.
And then only much later did he sort of move down to London. I think it was sort of during the war, so I don't know why
Yeah.
he never got called up for national service.
Well, that one of the things struck me when I was looking back at the story of it, and the crimes he committed as an adult were sort of started in the 40s, and
Mm,
then he gets put in prison for fraud in 1940. One, I think it is, he's let out in 43, and
mm.
what do you know about 1943? It's all about the war, isn't it? The very
Yeah,
idea that normal, in inverted commas, crimes are going on in the war years, it seems extraordinary to us.
yeah, I do
But yeah,
remember there was apparently there was a serial killer in the Second World War in London. I think it's called like I don't know, the Blackout Ripper or something, but somebody who was sort of committing murders. Obviously, during the blackout, it was very dark,
yeah,
and
absolutely.
you could
Yeah.
attack people quite easily. But yeah, John Haig, I don't know why he hadn't been called up. Maybe he had flat feet or one of those sort of classic excuses for not getting out of war service. But
Yeah, he certainly
he,
didn't have a reserved occupation
no,
because all he used to do was rip people off through fraud, and he was
yeah,
quite a smooth talker, and he could talk his way into you know anybody's confidence, and that's how he took advantage of people, and then when plain old-fashioned fraud didn't work, he figured the reason he was getting caught is because he was leaving his marks alive.
yeah.
So, So he moved on to murder.
Yeah, but I mean, like you say, wartime. Maybe he missed his career. Should have been a British spy, or it could have, gone
He
in,
certainly,
helped the
with his,
French resistance.
yeah, well, with his smooth, talking ways, that probably would have been he probably would have been really good at that. But
Yeah, and looking at the pictures of him, he looked, I mean, not like a sort of Errol Flynn, but he looked sort of fairly sort of devilishly handsome chap with
yeah,
this, I
yeah,
think, moustache.
yeah,
I
oily,
can
sort
imagine he
of
charmed the
smooth.
lady.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, he charmed his way into their affections and then ripped them off in every sense of the word.
Yeah, I remember there was a TV drama. I think Martin Clunes played him. Might have been the 90s or early noughties or something, where
Oh, yeah.
and he was, very much. He apparently moved himself into the Onslow Court Hotel in Kensington and
Yeah.
was sort of living out of there, um, and sort of just chatting, especially sort of elderly ladies and stuff.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
his last victim was also a resident of that Onslow Court Hotel.
mm,
And she had she was pleased to find him who because he said he had an engineering background and he could help her, so he thought, with her invention, which was to do with the manufacture of false fingernails.
oh, right.
So that's how he tempted her down to the now infamous workshop in the little village of Crawley, as was.
Yeah.
And
So, I mean, I get false fingernails. I mean, that might have been quite a lucrative invention because quite a lot of ladies wear them nowadays. So
yeah,
maybe she was ahead of her time. But
yeah,
yeah. So
could do
tell
really good.
me, I his the murder scene. I think all the murders were, or all the bodies were disposed of at 2 Leopold Road in Crawley.
Yeah.
Do you
Well, I
know
know.
anything about that site or?
Yeah, well, I know Crawley a little bit, and I always understood that it was on a what we now call sort of a business park near where Crawley football ground is. But I happened to look up Leopold Road, and it's not there at all. It's not
No.
far from there, but it's in what is a very residential area. And look at the uh, old black and white footage of it when the police are uncovering the crime scene. The sorts of pictures, incidentally, you would never get on TV these days because there'd
Mm,
be black, tents up over the area. But it's all
yeah.
very easy to watch on googling it and seeing videos of it. But no, it's in a what? It's a very ordinary residential area, a sort
Mm.
of a quarter of a mile, a fifth of a mile from the edge of Crawley now. But maybe back at the time it was more rural than it is now, because of course Crawley is a different place to it was in 1949 when he was finally caught.
Yeah, because I know the footage you're talking about, and there's kind of a small little building, presumably a workshop on
Yeah,
a piece of land. I presume it was sort of knocked down and erased
yeah.
from history.
But there's the
But
police in their ordinary black uniforms poking through the debris, and seeing if they can uncover some gallstones or a
yeah,
spare foot or something, which, you know, and they had their version of forensics back then, but it's, nothing like what it is these days.
yeah. Apparently, he started off by he experimented with mice, dropping mice
Yeah,
in. Was it sulfuric acid? Was that the
yeah, yeah.
um, and he found how sort of they disappeared, and then sort of
Mm,
calculated, right, that's how much I'd need to get rid of an adult human.
mm.
Quite
And
a grisly
he
idea to think about it.
he was, so very clever in his own mind that he worked it out and he reduced his victims to nothing more than black sludge
Mm,
and then just tipped that down the drain. Um, but when the police were finally at the scene, uncovering it all, they found that he hadn't been quite so clever after all because there were false teeth, gallstones, and even part of his last victim's foot that
mm.
hadn't been totally sold uh, away. So it wasn't quite the perfect way of disposing the bodies that he thought it was.
No, but like you say, the key to it him being caught was Olivia Duran Deacon. I think this
Hmm.
sort of well-to-do lady with a made up what's the word, fabricated fingernails plan,
Yeah. Yeah.
and she apparently had told a friend, uh, I'm not sure if somebody else, a hotel guest, but she told another woman that, oh, I'm going to meet this John Haig, and she'd actually given his name, or he'd given
He
his
was,
real name.
they were both residents in the same hotel, so she knew
Yeah,
him, and
mm,
so she didn't think there was anything wrong with, telling her friend that who she'd gone was going to Crawley with.
yeah.
Uh, that was the woman remembered and tipped him off. Yeah,
So even the most inept police would have been able to work out what had happened, really. Even though they must have been a bit mystified. Where's her body? We can't find any sign of her body.
but they
Um,
knew he had a long criminal record
yeah,
for fraud. He'd had at least two lengthy prison sentences. So when they heard the name and she disappeared, they put two and two together quite quickly,
yeah,
and went to the scene. And but he was quite blasé about it, saying, "Well, there's no body, so you won't be able to catch me. There won't be
yeah.
anything. You won't be able to prove anything."
You would have thought that is, that's he was virtually confessing, wasn't he? But he was sort of goading them and said, "Well, go on then, prove it."
But he was so good at fraud and he was so good at fooling people that he probably convinced himself that
Mm.
that was good enough. But there you go.
But the obviously the other thing I love about those days is how swift justice was.
Yes.
So his last murder was 18th of February 1949.
Yeah.
By August, he'd been hung.
Well,
So
not only
he'd
that,
managed
but
to get a trial, and no, yeah, I don't know if he had an appeal, but yeah, bish bosh, that's it.
yeah, absolutely. And no backlog in the court system in those days, obviously. But he
No,
was tried at Lewes Assizes, which today is Lewes. Well, Lewes has a Crown Court, and that's like the main Crown Court in Sussex. But although he was a criminal and investigated by the Met, because the bodies were found, or the remains of the bodies were found in Crawley, maybe that's why he went to Lewes, a Sussex court, which
oh,
I
I
was quite
see.
surprised.
Yeah, I hadn't realised that the Lewis connection, but yeah, that
Yeah.
would have
But
been
then the other
Sussex.
thing you say about swift justice. The other thing that when I was reading up about it was the jury took 17 minutes to
Ah,
find him
yes,
guilty.
yeah. Well,
Fantastic.
I was talking to somebody the other day, an old Bailey veteran reporter who I won't name, but and we're talking about why juries take so long nowadays, and I was comparing it literally to those, some cases in the sort of death penalty era where they
Hmm.
took yeah, like 17 minutes. That's somebody's life you're deciding. Now
Yeah.
they can take weeks, and nobody's going to nobody's going to die or even go to prison for their life.
No.
Maybe we
Well,
live in a better era where people are more thoughtful and
yeah, but it's the the fact that he was obviously guilty.
yes.
Um,
Well, we're
and
going to move on to the next case
Well,
where
that's just what I was going to refer to, sort of in
mm,
advance of that, is because obviously guilty. Actually, he wasn't guilty, which is the
yes,
next one you're probably going to talk about.
yes, exactly. So it's another John. Now, I'm not saying all Johns are murderers, but John Reginald Halliday Christie was another notorious murder case from the same sort of era, a little bit later, the 1950s, early 50s.
Mm.
But yeah, in that case, we had Timothy Evans. I don't know if you've ever seen 10 Rillington Place with Richard Attenborough, isn't it? Richard
Yeah,
Attenborough
yeah,
playing Christie. And I think it's a young John Hurt
yeah,
playing Timothy Evans, who
yeah.
was a young sort of Welshman, I'm not sure if he was a bit thick, but he was a
He
bit sort of
was.
easily led. And he
Yeah,
sort of looked up to Christie, and he was a lodger, or him and his wife were a lodger in the house.
and the baby.
And
Yeah,
so one day, I think you'll have to refresh my memory, but wasn't it? I'm not sure if Christie was doing abortions, or there was some sort of because obviously at the time abortions were illegal, weren't they? So
yeah.
I
Well,
think there was some sort of
Christie
abortion racket.
he was a dodgy character by any account, and
Mm,
he lived with his wife in this address 10 Rillington Place, which is one of the most famous ex-addresses in London, I think, in Notting
Mm.
Hill. I'm sure
Yeah.
the Notting Hill residents are mindful of that. But he served as a policeman during the war, and had a wide lots of jobs, and so but that one of being a policeman is quite important later on, because as a former policeman, his testimony was
Mm.
given more weight, despite the
Right.
fact he was a rubbish policeman,
Mm.
and was regularly off sick, regularly being sent home, and not trusted to do anything important. The fact that he was an ex-policeman, he was able to, when it came to court, he was able to say, "Well, I'm a policeman," and in those days, that meant that you were above reproach. You must be perfectly good. But
Mm.
he'd been seeing sex workers regularly, and he had been systematically murdering them
Mm.
from right from the 1940s. Um, and then he made uh, had lodgers in the house, and when he was murdering these people, he was burying them in the garden, burying them behind false walls in this house, putting up little partitions, putting the bodies in there and wallpapering over it. Meanwhile, living in his house with his wife,
Mm.
uh, and was just, well, it really quite chilling. And you talk about that movie 10 Rillington Place with Richard Attenborough. There was about 5 years ago, maybe, there was a BBC three-part drama
Mm.
starring Timothy Spall. It was
Right.
absolutely brilliant and totally chilling, and I'd absolutely recommend if you can
Well,
find that.
I can imagine him playing Christie. Yeah.
It was absolutely amazing, and I'm not one really for watching series on TV. I don't mind one-offs, but
Mm.
series I can't be bothered to commit the time to it. But it was extraordinary, and how he persuaded the his new tenants, um, the Timothy Evans and his wife Beryl, and they've got the baby Geraldine in this tiny little one room up the top of his property, and they're screaming at each other day and night, and they're just not in a happy place. And then they find she's pregnant again,
Mm.
and Christie says, "I can help you with that." So he sends Timothy Evans out for the away, and he performs this procedure on on his wife, on Beryl, but he drugs her, rapes her, and then murders her, and puts her in the one of these alcoves he's created in the house, and he strangled the baby. Although that's part that he never got done for, because he refused to admit that. But when Timothy came home, he said, "Yeah, I'm sorry it didn't work out, and she's passed away, so I've buried her. You won't see her again, but it's nothing to worry about." And so this guy who's not very bright, he's devastated, but he accepts what he's been told.
Mm.
And then, when the authorities are onto it as a mysterious death, Christie manages to um, persuade this Timothy Evans to lie about, the wife's gone away and she'll be back soon, and she's gone here and gone there. And that's
Right.
just making him look more and more guilty.
Yeah.
And they end up in court, and Evans sort of, realizes what's happening. And he says, "No, Christie did it. Yeah, Christie's murdered them or something. I went out and came back,
Mm.
and she was gone." And
A
and
former policeman murdered them. I don't
and that's
think.
when Christie said, "But I'm a former policeman. I can be trusted. You can trust my word. You can't trust this word, because
Mm.
he's not very bright, and he's from Wales. And they were saying that these people up in London, you can't trust these people, and outrageous. And now and I don't know how long the jury took. I guess it was longer than 17 minutes, but I guess
Some
it
sort of
was.
anti-Welsh bias counted against him.
Well,
Yeah.
I think it was just that, looking down upon people who are up in London from the shires, or
Mm.
from well out of town. You can imagine the jury will all be East Enders, Well, no, Notting Hill. So they'll all be Londoners, let's say,
Mm,
and they've got a former policeman, and they've got a guy from Wales who's incoherent and is contradicting what he said in his statement,
mm.
and so they side with him, and it doesn't end well for him.
No, no. So, spoiler alert, if you haven't caught up with it after 70 years, Timothy Evans was found guilty and hanged. And then, oh my God, a year or two later, literally, I think it was,
Mm,
maybe 4 or 5 years at the most,
mm,
suddenly, yeah, so Christie murders his wife, Ethel, who's been clearly getting in the way of his bizarre sex life.
yeah.
And then it all seems to unravel. So I'm not quite sure why, but
But what I tell you what happened.
he sort of he decides to let the house out, sublet the
Yeah.
house. But he must have had there must be some reason why he just it's all collapsed around him.
But he's decided to give up the remainder of the lease on his house and move out.
Right.
And the new lessee who's moved in wants to do some decorating. So they go to put some nails in the wall or something, one of these walls, and they find out this is just a very flimsy wall, and it's nothing more than, a bit of plywood or something. Pulls it away, and there is a pile of dead bodies, up 3, 4, 5 years old.
Yeah, I remember that scene from the film
God,
because I think I mean, it's quite interesting, isn't it? Sort of socially, culturally. I think it was a West Indian family move in, and it's obviously that era. I think that whole area, sort of Notting Hill, North Kensington, was quite a
mm,
low, what's the word? Sort of socially deprived,
right,
sort of very working class area. And lots of rented flats and rented houses, and nowadays it's very gentrified, and the house there would cost you a fortune, but
yeah,
it wasn't in those days, and that's why partly why a lot of sort of the Windrush generation sort of moved in
mm,
because they could afford to live there, where other
mm,
parts of London they couldn't. Um, so yeah, they move in and just find this disgusting alcove of death.
yeah.
Um, I
And
don't
then there's
understand how the smell had not sort of made it
well,
apparent.
the neighbours had been complaining about the smell
Hmm.
for years, but nothing was done about it. I don't think we had
Okay, right.
environmental health in those days.
No, blame the
Um,
sewers or something like that.
yeah,
Probably,
yeah,
yeah,
that's right. But it was that finally caught him, and then they went after him, looking for him, and they found him. I don't know, a week or 10 days or something later on, walking around
yeah.
London.
Near Putney Bridge,
Right.
he was finally challenged, and it was quite interesting because this was all. It was the same year as the coronation, so I imagine most of the country, especially London, was obsessed with the coronation.
Mm,
It was a real big deal. That was June 1953.
yeah.
He was arrested in March 1953, and by July he'd been also
Yeah.
dispatched, hanged. But sadly, we couldn't bring back Timothy Evans and give him an apology. But
Well,
and I imagine that case probably led to part of the reason why the abolition of the death penalty, cases like that.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, the that was a gold standard case that the abolitionists brought forward, and it went a long way to getting the 1963 Act, which was passed, I think, in 1966 and made into law in 1969, when the death penalty was finally abolished. And that's kind of, we alluded to age earlier on. So that's been, the death penalty was still legally in force when you and I were both born, which
Oh,
is,
right, yeah, yeah.
so it's
Well, certainly when you were born. Not sure about me.
1969 they finally abolished it. So
Oh, okay,
you
right.
you do the math, as
Mm.
they would say.
Okay, well, yeah, well, that was Christie. We're going to move now into the post-death penalty era, and this is a crime. People probably wanted him to get the death penalty for. So we mentioned him earlier, Donald Nielsen, the Black Panther. I'm not quite sure. It sounds like a tabloid nickname. Some tabloid reporter must have given him that nickname. It's a bit too glamorous. I'm not sure if he deserves it, but.
he got the nickname from the way he used to creep in and out of sub post offices.
Oh, right, right.
And until I looked it up this afternoon, I didn't realise how many. He'd committed 400 robberies on sub
Wow.
post offices in mainly in the
Oh,
north of England
yeah.
over a 10-year period, and he would creep in and
Hmm,
crept in and crept out again. But he disturbed the sub postmaster or sub postmaster, his wife, on more than one occasion, and
hmm.
three of those sub postmasters were killed.
Oh,
And so,
right, right.
where robbery turned into murder, so there was a murder hunt going on for
Hmm,
him long before he really came to the general nationwide public's attention,
hmm,
because you know a series, albeit hundreds, of sub post office raids, mainly in the north of England, with murders, wouldn't probably make um, the national news in quite the same way
hmm.
as the abduction of Leslie Whittle in Worcestershire in
Yeah.
the
So,
70s.
1975, he decides to, post um, office raids are not doing it, are not getting him enough money. He's going to go for the big one. So, there was a firm called Whittle's Coaches who were quite a big operator in the Midlands. Ferrying people around, probably football fans and all sorts, going to day outs of the beach or whatever.
School,
And
school kids to school and day trips and everything. Yeah, and the guy had
yeah,
60 coaches in his fleet, so it was a pretty sizable operation.
yeah. In the sort of early days of, well, not early days, but the sort of the motorways were coming on, weren't they? They're being
Yeah.
built, so it was quite a big, growing industry.
Mm.
And his daughter Leslie, she was 18 or something, or she was quite youngish.
Yeah, she was.
Um,
My research let me down. I don't know, but she
yeah,
was a teenager, I think. Yeah.
yeah, and she was like an, well, she described as an heiress, but I mean, she wasn't. I don't think she was like, like an upper class woman, but she was obviously from an affluent family and they had a bit of money. And
Yeah.
I don't know, Donald Nielsen had seen these coaches going around, or whether he'd done a bit of research,
Well,
but
the
he
pro-
he he
the
managed to figure
in,
out, he was going to try to kidnap her and demand a ransom.
the heiress thing came from the father dying and leaving the coach company to his kids. And
Right.
so in the local paper, what these local press are like,
Oh
the
yeah. Mm.
local
Pain.
paper reported the coach company being left to Ronald and Leslie, and so
Mm.
they called them the heir and heiress to the coach company. And
Mm.
so Donald Nielsen reads that she's an heiress, albeit that I think she inherited £80,000.
Yeah.
So he's come up with she's an heiress. She's worth abducting, and I can claim a reward.
Yeah. Okay. We're gonna speed this up a bit because we've got one more case to do. So, a terrible story. But she was held underground in a sort of some big country park in Staffordshire, I think it was.
Yeah. Well, there's
And
a
I think,
huge
yeah, he
park
was.
and it's got a warren of tunnels underneath and drains.
Mm,
And he's put her on a platform halfway down one of these drains and put a wire noose round her neck to stop her, trying to escape.
yeah.
Um, when they found her, she'd fallen or been pushed off this ledge. And although they say the cause of death was shock or fright
Mm.
from, being hung rather than actual strangulation, but a barbaric way to die. And
Yeah. I mean, you wonder whether she sort of fell asleep or something. I mean, how
they
it's
say
just
she might have
awful. Or
tried
slipped.
to tried to escape and jump, or
Mm.
he came back in and pushed. They don't know, and obviously he won't admit. But they said,
Yeah.
why didn't you put the noose or the tie around a leg or an arm if you
Mm.
didn't mean for her to die? Well, obviously he didn't have any answer to that.
No, well, he eventually got convicted. I think from memory, the trial was quite a big deal.
Mm,
But he did get, a lot of coverage. He did get found guilty and got a life sentence.
yeah.
And because there was no death penalty, he lived to the ripe old age of 75.
Mm.
Um, fell ill in Norwich prison in December 2011 and passed away in the hospital.
And the
Um,
judge said they're going to give you life, and in your case, it will mean life. Now, he didn't
right.
have the power to do a whole life order, but the
Mm.
judge was proved right because the guy never came out of prison.
No, I don't. I mean, what is that? 1975. That's 25, 36 years. So, yeah, he would. I mean, I don't remember. There was a no. Never any real attempt to get parole for it. It's not like Brady and Hindley or anything like that. There was no real
No.
attempt for him to get out.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, we're going to move. We've got a few minutes left, so I'm going to move on to a case that I remember was just gradually almost coming into our era or my era. Um, and this is the famous case of, well, the two men, Reg Dudley and Bob Maynard, who in the 90, again, same sort of era, 1974, 75, um, there was two sort of London underworld murders, a guy called Billy Mosley and a guy called Mickey Cornwall. I mean, you couldn't make them up if you were a script writer. Both went missing, and one of them, a headless body was found. Anyway, cut a long story short, 1977, Reg and Bob, who supposedly ran a sort of North London crime outfit, which was nicknamed Legal and General,
Mm.
which I thought was quite amusing. Anyway,
Mm.
they got convicted, and in 2002, they were both released, and I actually met Reg Dudley only a few days after his conviction had been quashed. I'm going to read out a little tiny bit of that article, the beginning of it. So just picture yourself. It was a street in Islington. I can't remember, somewhere near Angel, I think it was. Um, and it says, passers-by greet Reg Dudley, shake his hand, and offer congratulations as he puffs on a roll-up cigarette outside a pub on a sunny street near his home in North London. On Tuesday, three Court of Appeal judges quashed his conviction and that of co-defendant Bob Maynard. It brought to an end a fight for justice which has lasted a quarter of a century. Now, I don't know if you knew about this case before I raised it. Have you've
I
read up
didn't.
about it?
I'm
What do you?
surprised. I'm surprised I didn't know about it
Mm,
because, as you say, it was a big one. They're saying it was at the time it was the longest criminal case that had been in the court. I think it was like 3 months or something in court.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I
the
didn't
original
realize.
case,
Um,
and so I'm surprised I didn't know about it. But it was perhaps it was a year or two before my interest in true crime took off with Donald Nielsen. But was this guy just as much of a crook as he sounded when you met
well,
him?
he was a character. You can imagine back in the day,
Character. I think
he
that's
would
what I
have
should
been
have said.
one of the boys. He would have been,
Hmm.
face or I'm trying to think what they call it. Staunch, as London
Yeah.
criminals of that time would describe each other. Like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, he's proper, he's staunch.
Hmm.
Um, but he said he was in it. He didn't do this crime. Neither of these crimes. He actually said that the Burt Wixty, the detective, had sort of come up with his own theory. Firstly,
Hmm.
he thought that they'd killed. I think Billy Mosley first because he had an affair with somebody, and it was like a contract killing.
Yeah.
Um,
With Ronald
and then
Fright's wife.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, Bob Fright sounds a good name. And then the other guy, Mickey Cornwall, apparently started asking questions about what happened to his friend Billy, and they decided to kill him as well. None of that was, it was all kind of speculation. But my favourite part of the story, of course, and coming down to Brighton, near where you live, was this bizarre tale that I think one of the prosecution witnesses came out and claimed that Reg Dudley had walked into this pub. I think it's called the Horse and Groom in Brighton.
Yeah.
I don't know if it still exists.
Yeah.
Um, and just plonked down one of the heads. I think it was Billy Mosley's head on the bar to his this mate who he knew from London, had moved down to Brighton and said, "There
Hmm.
you go," and whatever, and started telling, bragging about what he'd done and whatever. I mean,
Hmm.
it sounds a bit implausible.
Well,
Imagine if a customer had walked in and said, "Oh, what's going on here?" Mm.
Yeah.
I'll have
Well,
a pint. I'll have a bottle of light ale or something.
the Horse and Groom is one of those very old-fashioned pubs. You can picture the pub, one of those ones with the green tiles all over the front. Do you know what I mean?
Mm. Oh yeah,
Um, it's I think it's Tamplin's Ales. It was like their I don't know what all the pubs are green tile on the front, all over the front.
mm.
And I've drunk in there a few years ago. I think it's closed at the moment. I think they're trying to. People have put in plan permission to have it turned into flats like everywhere
Oh
else.
no,
There's
they
a
need to
move
bring it back, and
get
they
it
need to have a
reopened as a
plaque.
pub. But it's up in a part of Brighton called Hanover, and there's a different pub on every corner up there, so it's a good location, and we can't
Yeah, well, I
afford.
think they should bring it back. They should have a plaque on the bar. They should have a regular sort of true crime quiz or something, and just
Yeah,
dine out on the story. I think.
yeah, absolutely. Well,
Yeah,
there are pubs which you've taken us to where infamous crimes happened or so and so met, and they do make something of their notorious past, don't they? And I think if you get
yeah.
a
I'm
unique set of
thinking of the one. What was the one in East London, Marlin Road, where Jack the Hat Vitti was killed? I've forgotten
yeah,
the
I
Blind
can't.
Beggar, which is
That's it. Yeah,
classic case,
but
wasn't it?
I mean, we went in that and we were quite disappointed that it was all Sky Sports and fruit machines, and I kind of expected it to be leather armchairs and bullet holes in the window.
Yeah, yeah, and there's tobacco smoke or
Yeah,
still
yeah,
there, but okay. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to delve into the I think it's been mainly London. Well, I actually know the Black Panther was Midlands, so
mm,
been a fascinating chat, and
yeah,
I'm glad that I hope all Substack readers enjoy. And there's going to be no written output with this. It's simply the video or the audio. But yeah, thanks very much, Nigel, and
yeah, good. Thanks a lot.
enjoy the rest of your total crime. Enjoy your true crime podcasting, and feel free to give a name check for a couple of the you listen to.
Well, my favourite one is Paul, who records the True Crime Enthusiast. He tells some incredible stories, and he does it without too much humour, but just at the right point, he'll have a little aside. And the True Crime podcast is